That's something else. Look at that Mew VMAX. Tier 0. 35% meta share. That's crazy good. So in the tweet that Justin Basil put out, the Mew VMAX meta share claims over a third, so over 33% of the meta. It surpasses ADPZ, Pikarom, and Eternatus at their peaks. Okay? But there's two things to think about. Let's talk about Mew VMAX first. That is a huge meta share. If a deck has a higher meta share than even ADPZ at its peak, you would think that that's a bad thing. If a deck is so all-encompassing that it's sitting at that much played. But think about this for a second, okay? Look down here at number 7, Duraludon VMAX. Duraludon VMAX was not even on the board before this week. And it's kind of resulted of, the Mew VMAX being up here means Duraludon gets to be down here. It means that Umbreon gets to sit at number 2. It's not always a bad thing if there is a very central, very good go-to deck. I would agree that it being that high is pretty bad, but it's not as though Mew can't be beaten. It's not like ADPZ where it just had an answer for everything. Mew has weaknesses that you can exploit. It's wholly reliant on special energy. It has a weakness that can be punished. If you rock up with Eternatus, if you were to play like a 4-4 Umbreon VMAX deck, you could beat Mew. ADPZ was different because it got to take extra prizes. It couldn't have its weakness exploited by anything that was good. Like you couldn't build a fairy deck in that format very well. And it attacked with Zacian anyway. So your fairy Pokemon were just getting knocked out no matter what you tried. So it's not so bad. What will happen is that Mew gets a big target on its back, and certain decks will rise up through the ranks. If you're so sick of Mew, you can just play a Dark Pokemon deck and beat it. You could just turn up with the Single Strike Dark Urshifu and beat it, if you wanted. It's not so bad. And what happens for you as perhaps a very competitive player, the deck building and selection process becomes narrower and clearer. You don't have 8 decks that you need to worry about. You have Mew, and you have decks that beat Mew. And when a metagame becomes narrower like that, you can feasibly think about picking the meta, if that makes sense. It is actually reasonably predictable, and you don't have a million different matchups to tech for. You've got a narrower set of matchups to tech for, and so you can come to a logical conclusion. For one player, that logical conclusion was Duraludon VMAX. And I think I saw in the chat, somebody mentioned other decks that are popping up, which are beating Mew. I think I saw a video published very recently by Celios Network about that Moltres deck. You've got Urshifu Moltres V as an option against Mew. So when a deck becomes centralizing, it's not so bad if counter strategies can be developed for it. And then things become circular, right? They become circular in a way where Mew might get beaten out by one certain type of deck and get beaten to oblivion. And then those counter decks get beaten by decks that might be a bit more stable, a bit more solid. Decks like your Suicune, decks like your Ice Rider Calyrex. And then as those decks become popular, Mew VMAX can rise again because players know that Mew can hang tough with them. We've played through metagames like this so many times in the past, where you had the best decks, the decks that beat the best decks, and everything else that wanted to contend with those. So it's not so bad. It's not the worst thing in the world. I wouldn't be worried about Mew VMAX. It is everywhere, and yeah, it might be annoying, but you don't need to worry about it. I think that people are going to start shying away from it because they're going to see that after a very strong weekend, players are going to build counters into their lists. It isn't the type of deck that can completely stamp out its weaknesses, figuratively and literally. That's all I really had to say about Mew. I kind of want to do short talks like this, and I want to start putting them on YouTube, just on different thoughts that I have about the game and ways to think about it. So if you think things like this are cool, let me know.